and I need to rant at you about gifted programs in this country for education. I'm so...
I too need to rant about gifted education in this country. So I have spent the last couple of days getting up to date on research, educational research, and psychological research related to giftedness, specifically as it impacts learning for our K through 12 learners. And I went and I read over 20 research articles, meta-analyses, and I'm going to highlight a couple that stood out to me about giftedness. I like this article, this research summary around twice exceptional students, review of implications for special and inclusive education. This talks about how, with proper supports, students who have really, really spiky profiles and have incredible cognitive strengths in specific areas can be included in general education if things are done appropriately for them. And it reviews other studies on giftedness over the years about how separating out students is not necessarily the best thing for them. The study, Neuropsychological Profile of Intellectually Gifted Children, a Systematic Review, is a meta-analysis on giftedness. And it talks a little bit about how there seems to be alignment on some cognitive traits. Who does it leave out? And I'll even show you how large the sample sizes of these meta-analyses. So to my research nerds, these are not like double-blind studies the way that we would think research goes. This is analysis of research studies. And they had some interesting results when they looked, and their sample size was over 300 when they looked across all the different research studies that they were comparing. That intellectually gifted children exhibited better skills than typically developing children in a number of domains, including attention, language, mathematics, verbal working memory, shifting, and social problem solving. However, the two groups had comparable skills in visual spatial processing, memory, planning, inhibition, and visual working memory or facial recognition. These are not studies that are looking if children are autistic, if they have other developmental delays, and twice exceptional is throughout this meta-analysis as well. Lastly, I want to highlight this one. It's called The Cognitive Profiles of Gifted Children, a Latent Profile Analysis Using the ACEs. So the ACEs here is the Andalusac, I might be mispronouncing that, intelligence scale. It's an intelligence evaluation tool originating from Turkey. So unlike us using like the WISC here, for example, that we use pretty frequently for cognitive testing. And what is so fascinating about this article, to me, this is from 2023, is it talks about two profiles that emerge when we use the ACEs model of looking at cognitive strengths. One of the factors that comes up is there's verbal intelligence, which we'll see in some ways like verbal comprehension index being really high on the WISC, for example, it's comparable there. But there's also nonverbal intelligence, which is not nonverbal in the way that we think of like nonverbal people, but nonverbal in terms of like visual spatial. And it really speaks to this idea that we have gifts that we are just not seeing, or that the school system does not honor because it doesn't link to like reading, writing, and math. If you have made it this far, I hope you hang with me for a little bit of context, okay? So I was a gifted student, quote unquote. I did gifted and talented since elementary school. I graduated high school with a 4.19 GPA, and I had already accumulated more than a year's worth of college credits. I go to college. I graduate in 3 years with a double major, double minor with a 4.36 GPA, and then I end up becoming unhoused, and I end up going into Teach for America, which I have videos about why it's terrible, and getting my master's in teaching and 2 advanced certificates on top of that. To no one's surprise but my own, turns out I'm an undiagnosed autistic person. All the signs were there. I had vocal stims when I was a child. I was having meltdowns. I struggled with transitions. I was incredibly bullied as a younger child. I took on the role of a bully when I was in middle school. I was socially vulnerable. I was either a teacher's worst nightmare or the teacher's like pet. All the things were there, okay? But I want to talk about how much I fight for quote-unquote advanced students to be seen as kids first. Our concept of giftedness is very, very biased based on race, culture, linguistic access, meaning is English your first language, and socioeconomic status. there's also research that shows that gifted students are more likely to come from families that have socioeconomic access to do enrichment activities. So there's also research on that. But I want to talk about the fact that we only see intelligence in a frame that we think is like better than the IQ tests that determine eligibility for giftedness, and it's not. The very concept that we think that there's geniuses, that we think some kids are gifted and some kids are not, is eugenics. And it's not like in a conceptual, like, eye-rolly, I'm just being really political for no reason kind of way. No, it's actually eugenics. The reason I say this is because it hurts everyone. The gifted children that are seen as gifted are denied their childhoods very often. No one understands that they are still children. So the cognitive load of doing busy work, advanced projects, depending on the quality of your quote-unquote gifted or advanced programming, I was really lucky. I had really good advanced programming, is going to take an immense toll on you cognitively and physically. On the flip side, students who don't look like our concept of giftedness because their intelligence is not the kind of intelligence that school honors and respects because it's not in key academic areas, but it's like art, singing, being amazing with younger children, acting, singing, right? Like those kids are not seen as gifted. They're often seen as disruptive. They're often seen as a behavior problem. They're often seen as undesirable, right? And before anyone talks about capitalism, I'm centering this conversation about white supremacy, because we have a 74% white teaching field, and students who go to gifted programming will tell you, and the research talks about this, that as you go up in the rigor of gifted programming, it is much more likely to become affluent and white, right? So, and how teachers across this country and districts allow students to be selected into gifted programming is often an IQ test. A lot of it is the COGAT, COGAT. There's talent spotting lessons. There's work samples, there's portfolios, teacher referrals. Some districts allow parents to refer. Some of it is based on district standardized testing. So if you don't curry the favor of an educator who's got your back, if you are not seen as a student who does well on assessments, it is very unlikely that you're going to get into gifted programming, and then even if you do, the quality of that gifted programming is questionable. All in all, to say, this is why I fight so hard for, even if a child is advanced, for us to remember that they are a child. The amount of anxiety I see from kids who are pushed because they're just seen as little adults, and sometimes, and I know you're not going to like it, this is including by their parents, is very, very, very common. And they're exhausted and they go into burnout at a very young age. So, things to chew on.